Hi, I'm Dan Collison, Managing Partner of Advice to Advisors. And if you're watching this video now, you've obviously been talking to White Glove about the potential of presenting an estate planning seminar, or in fact, you've made that decision and you just want more information on how to go about doing it. So we've been asked to go through this tutorial for financial advisors. Just before we get into it, however, I just want to give you a bit of background. So I've been in the industry for 35 years now. I started much like you as a financial advisor. I built my business up over a number of different methodologies of prospecting, but none were as good as doing seminars. I started very small with small groups, and over time, as I got more comfortable, and I'm a naturally shy person, so it took me a little bit to get on top of this, but as I did, I got more comfortable. As I got the materials down pat, I got even more comfortable to the point where I could stand in front of 1,000 attendees and have no problem delivering a seminar that I know very well. And that's what we're hoping to pass on to you. So what I want to show you is exactly what it is that we've done to build protecting your estate, keeping it safe from creditors, taxation, and your family. And I want to show you how to present it and how you could add your own spin, and most certainly how you can add your own stories to the presentation to really make it yours, and so that you can do the number one goal that you want to achieve, which is book appointments. So again, before we get into this, I want to start with the one thing that I always talk to coaching clients about, and that's having a philosophy about whatever the topic it is that you're discussing. And in this instance, with estate planning, I'm going to give you my philosophy, and it's twofold. Number one, whenever possible, I want to be able to show my clients their legacy play out in front of their very own eyes. In other words, most people think of estate planning as what happens to their wealth after they're dead. And that's one of the reasons most people don't want to get involved in estate planning, because it has everything to do with death. So my belief is I want to be able to show them how to take advantage of seeing their legacy play out while they're still here. And that's going to be infused throughout the seminar. Number two part of the philosophy is very much and shared from medical doctors: do no harm. So we know through research that when individuals, and in this instance beneficiaries, receive large amount of monies that they didn't actually earn, they can end up far worse off financially, even emotionally, than had they never received that money. So we want to have the technical wherewithal, those capabilities, those technical strategies in estate planning that we can pass on to our prospects and clients to show them that we can help them protect their beneficiaries as well. So let's get into it. So I'll tell you, the very first thing I want to do at a seminar is I'm going to be at the door ahead of time, and I'm going to greet people, just shake their hands. If you're up to doing that, just tell them my name, introduce myself. And as the room starts to fill up, I'm ultimately going to move to the front of the room and take my position. And then I'm going to get started. And the first way I'm going to do it, I'm just going to look around and I'm going to say, do we have any attorneys in the audience? And if somebody puts their hands up, all well and good. Or if not, either way, I'm going to say, great, I'm going to have a bit of fun with this. I just got to tell you, the legalities and technicalities of our presentation today are so significant that you don't want to do this on your own. You do want professional advice. You want your estate attorney, you want your CPA, you want your financial advisor or planner in place helping you with this work. But I'm going to show you a lot, and I'm going to talk to you a lot, and by all means there's going to be questions, and this is where we get into the housekeeping. So I'm going to tell them any housekeeping needs, what the time frame is for the presentation. I'm going to mention there's no doubt going to be questions. I'm going to ask you to hold those questions till the end. In fact, I gave you paper and pen in your package. Just write down your questions and we'll take those up at the end. I've also set aside, and I'll give them a number, 10 times over the next 2 weeks where you can set a 30-minute, 60-minute, whatever it is you're going to give them time. So for those with very deep personal questions, or you want to have an overview of your own personal situation on estate plan, we can talk at that time. So let's get started. And right off the bat, I'm going to get attendees involved in the presentation. I want audience participation. So I'm starting with this brain teaser. I'm just going to say something like, I want to get everybody thinking before we get started. So I'm going to throw up some pictures here, and I just want you to shout out their names, and people will do this. So I throw up this first picture and I say, who is this? Somebody's going to yell out Jimi Hendrix. Absolutely Jimi Hendrix. Who's this? Might be a little tougher, but ultimately, if give them 3-4 seconds, somebody's going to hit on Howard Hughes. If not, you yell out Howard Hughes, one of America's biggest industrialists. At this time, he would have been a billionaire, but Howard Hughes. How about this? Right, Martin Luther King. Who's this? Yes, shares better half, Sonny Bono. And this? Totally, the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin. Anybody here? And you might have a little time here, but Amy Winehouse, the artist formerly known as Prince. Yes, the king of pop. And finally, and sadly, the newest inductee into this group, Anne Hesh. So we know all these people, well known to everyone here for the most part. What I want to ask you is, what do they all have in common? And then just shut up. Let somebody yell it out. Somebody may get the right answer, but ultimately, if they don't, I'm going to say they all died intestate. In other words, they all died without a will. And what that means is they left estates, and some of these became hundreds of millions of dollars in value of estates, as you can well imagine, that someone had to take care of, usually the family. And someone like a Jimi Hendrix, that estate is still running to this day. Died in 1970, and his stepsister, after suing her brother suing him, working with her stepfather, had to battle it out in court. And so many of these will go through the courts with battles. And the one thing I'm going to tell you, if we go through today's presentation, you get everything taken care of, this is not going to be a concern for you. So now this is where I'm going to start with my power opening. And I've got to tell you, this presentation has notes on every slide, so I'm not going to run through everything. You'll be able to read them. You'll also get a booklet on the presentation itself. But here's where I'm going to set apart the difference, and I'm going to actually let them start to understand my philosophy. And I'm going to tell them, yes, we're going to talk about the technicalities. This is what most people think about in estate planning, but what we want to talk about today is something far more empowering, something that you can actually do, which is get your choices out in front, take full control of your estate, of your life's well-being, of your life's lifelong wealth, everything that you can take control of. We're going to talk about that. But first, let's take Stephen Covey's second habit of begin with the end in mind. And what I'm going to ask you to do is think of this as your last day on this earth. And how would you like to see your legacy play out? And you notice how I slowed down my cadence, and I'm now introducing the concept of legacy. So we're going to get into that. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about money and how we can use money for ourselves over the rest of our lives, and certainly to your beneficiaries and whatever you decide to do with your estate. So, and now I'm going to talk about this, and this really is going to set you apart. And if you haven't read the book Happy Money, I strongly urge you to. I would buy the book. I would use that book. I always have it in my hand as a prop. And I'll just say, a book came out called Happy Money several years ago, written by Elizabeth Dunn, who teaches at the University of British Columbia, Michael Norton, who teaches at Harvard. And what they did with this book is it's a meta-analysis on money and happiness. So they looked at the hundreds and hundreds of studies on money and happiness, and they distilled it down to 5 distinct elements of what makes people happier in the ways they deal with money. And then I go through the 5, and I'm going to do it very quickly. This takes about 1 to 2 minutes. I'm going to talk about buying experiences rather than things, how experiences can give us lifelong happiness over buying things. Novelty, how making a treat gives us a spike in happiness, so shaking it up. I talk about, looks like the audience, most of you are either moving into retirement or already there. This is the time where you want to be doing, and you've earned the right to be doing what you want to do. So buy your free time. Wherever there's things you don't want to do, whether it's cutting the grass, hire a neighborhood kid. Cleaning the house, hire someone to do that. Delegate away the things you don't want to do so that you've got time to do exactly what it is you want to do. I talk about Walter Mischel's experiments, as it were, that he started in the 1960s. This is a longitudinal study that looked at delayed gratification, a great study. I've actually given you a website to some videos on this, but I say this is something, and a lot of the audience might have heard of this marshmallow study, but this is something that they can pass on to their children and their grandchildren, this delayed gratification. And finally, we talk about this fifth element, invest in others. The reality is we get more happiness when we help others in comparison to working extra hours and earning more money for ourselves. So wherever possible, help others. And the research shows even when we help people that aren't our families, they're strangers, we get happiness from doing that. Then I'm going to go into 5 questions, and I'm doing this specifically. Yes, I'm going to show them some stats, but what I want, again, is audience participation. So I'm going to drop down the question. I'm going to say, so I've got some questions. So as soon as you think you've got the number, just shout it out. And again, they're going to start doing this. And it's important to get this audience participation, because what ultimately I want them to do is see that they're in sync with each other. And I'm going to ultimately nudge them as a crowd to thinking in the way that I want them thinking, which ultimately will be booking an appointment. But first, I've got to get them all swaying in sync. So when they're all talking and getting to give their input, that's what helps with this. So I'm going to give it 2-3 seconds. People will shout out numbers. I drop down the number. I throw up the next one, and I do the exact same thing. So I read off or a short synopsis of what the question is, give it no more than 5 seconds, people shouting out. And if I'm not hearing anything, come on, folks, this isn't a test, and then they'll start shouting it out and get through those. And finally, I say, last one, shout it out, and they do. And then I say, great. Now, I've got some questions for you to ask yourself. And what makes this a very different type of presentation is that you're not going to be doing a lot of talking to them. You're asking them questions. And when you ask everybody in the audience the same questions, they're all processing that question. They're thinking about it for themselves. So you're pulling them all together by asking these questions. And you're not going to get that eyes glazed over that you so often get in financial seminars, because it's the presenter talking. Here, when we ask, they're actually listening to themselves in a lot of times. So I start off with, could you outlive your money? Importantly, I start here because this is what financial advisors can figure out. This is not what an estate attorney is going to do for them. So it's putting you in the driver's seat right off the bat. We know they can't figure it out for themselves. So you're asking the question. And I want to show you how this whole presentation, all these questions are going to work. Could you outlive your money? And then a whole bunch of bullet points come up. Here's the thing about all these. You will only talk to 1 or 2. And there's notes, as I said, below each of these, but 1 or 2 only. You want to leave the other ones hanging. The reason being is they will look at all these bullet points. They're not going to hear about all of them from us, but by seeing them, they believe you know all the information that's known about these bullet points. So we're doing what we call disturb and motivate. We're disturbing them to what they don't know, and we want to motivate them to one action today, which is book the appointment with you. So on this first one, I'm going to talk about maybe the caregiving squeeze. So I'll say, this audience looks primarily like baby boomers born between 46 and 64. And the trap that baby boomers are in today is they might well be taking care of their aged parents, either financially, physically, emotionally, but at the same time, they're taking care of their growing children. Some are in college, Some have gone to college, they've moved home, some have then got married, moved out, had children, and then they move back with the kids. I mean, this all creates stress, financial, emotional, even physical stress. So how are you dealing with this? And do you have the financial wherewithal to be actually doing this? Can this impact your retirement negatively? Is it going to impact your estate negatively? Then I move on with the second question. How much will your estate be worth? And unless you're a CPA, and here comes the bullet points again, unless you're a CPA, most individuals think of their estate in gross terms. In other words, they're not thinking after tax, after estate costs. They're thinking in gross amounts. Whatever they see their house is worth, they're thinking that. Whatever they see their portfolio is worth before taxes, they're thinking that. But the reality is that's not its net value, as financial planners, as CPAs will tell you, and as I'm sure you'll come to learn. Then what would happen to you, and more specifically to your family, if you weren't able to get out of bed today? So I don't even say incapacitated, I just say, what if you weren't able to get out of bed? And the bullet points pop up, right? I'm going to talk about powers of attorney, both financial as well as health. I'm going to talk about the need to have a short-term reserve on hand, usually 3 to 6 months worth of expenditures, so that their powers of attorney for finance can actually run their situation while they're incapacitated. I'm going to leave these other ones unless you specifically want to point out something on those that can be supported with insurance. Feel free to do so. That's the thing. This has been created so you can talk exactly how you want to talk, bring out the points you want to bring out. The next one, I leave this up for a few seconds because once they've read the tombstone, you're going to hear some chuckles throughout the audience. But I just asked, what would happen if you didn't wake up tomorrow? Well, we know what happens with you, but what would happen to your family? Yeah? Do you have a valid will in place? You know, maybe you do have a will, but maybe it's 20, 25, 30 years old. Is it still valid? Are the beneficiaries valid? You know, laws have changed, tax rules have changed. Do you have assets in different jurisdictions, in different states, in different countries? Do you need to look at having multiple wills or foreign wills? You know, could you die intestate? And again, just because you have a will in place doesn't mean it's necessarily a valid will. Has it been reviewed by an estate attorney over the last couple of years? Is it valid, or are you in fact potentially dying intestate, which means there is no will, at which time the state has a methodology by which they structure a will for your estate? And again, you can talk to anything within these bullet points, but keep it down to about 2. Move on to the fifth, and here is where I'm going to bring in the beginning of my stories, because the one thing we know from research is that emotions really motivate. In fact, the research says emotions are the fuel of motivation. So I want to start getting people emotionally involved in what we're talking about now. So who do you have to support? You know, there's a lot of people, as we said, with the sandwich generation, they're supporting parents potentially, even siblings, disabled siblings, you know, spouses, children, even grandchildren. You know, what about parents with special needs children? And here's the thing, and I've done dozens and dozens of these estate planning seminars. Every single person in the audience either has or knows someone that has a disabled child. And I'm just going to say something, you know, as a kid growing up, I grew up in the 60s and 70s, and heavily disabled children sadly didn't live beyond their 20s for the most part. But with medical advances, you know, children are living into their 50s, 60s, 70s with grave disabilities. And what's the parents' biggest concern? And use your hands, use your voice, your cadence, slow things down, because people are thinking. And as you watch the audience, people will start looking to each other. You'll see some people actually tear up with this, you know, and then you just say, give it a bit of a pause and just say something like, you know what? Their biggest concern is, who's going to take care of my child? And that is such an astounding question. And it's up to us to help them come up with the proper answers, the proper structures, the proper strategies. Next, are you part of a blended family? We do know, again, the research shows us that about 10% of families nowadays are blended families. They're into their second or even third marriages where they're bringing kids and grandkids all together, which adds a huge element of complexities to their day-to-day lives, to their finances, to the family law that they have to live within. And certainly it adds huge complexities to their estate planning and their legacy planning. And again, you might want to mention one or two of these things. Are there insurance obligations that have to be met from a previous spouse, that premiums have to continue to be paid? Have prenuptial agreements been written in anticipation, or marriage contracts drafted for the existing marriage? Does everybody talk to everybody? Have the spouses talk to each other about how the estate planning is going to play out with this blended family? Then what about how important is it for you to help out your children or even your grandchildren? And what we do know is upwards of 70% of Americans are now starting to think, yeah, maybe I don't want to be gone before my estate starts to help my kids or grandchildren. Maybe I want to be involved and I want to help. This is where I tell 3 specific stories. They're my own stories. Feel free to share them. One's a technical one. I was referred to an older couple. I did the retirement planning. I showed them that they had more money than they could ever spend in their lives. They agreed. I asked them if they'd be willing to pass the money down. John, who was at that time about 73 years old, said, no way, not going to do it. They'll just blow it. His wife, Margaret, actually said, settle down, John. Let's listen to Dan. And I just said, well, what if we could get them a bit of money that could benefit them, whether it goes into the retirement plans, pays down mortgages, pays for insurance, pays for children's education, whatever it is. What if we could do that? And at the same time, we're getting money out of your hands. So the interest, dividends, capital gains, we're not going to have the taxes on those, going to lower the costs of the estates themselves. Kind of a win-win-win. Would that be of interest to you? And again, he wasn't interested, but Margaret said, yes, Dan, that would be. And when I said, well, how much would you want to give to the kids? And they had 4 grown kids, 4 grandchildren. 2 of the grown kids were married. And he said $10,000. I said, $2,500 each? And he said, no, 10,000 each. So I went back, did some planning, figured it all out, and showed them. The beauty for me was I met all 4 of their children. I met the 2 spouses. I met the grandchildren. They all became clients, and these became significant clients for me. I'm not telling the audience this, I'm just telling you that. But over time, and Margaret sadly passed away probably about 8 or 9 years after that. They'd just gotten home from a cruise the next day. She had a massive heart attack and passed away in her early 80s. John actually lived another 2 or 3 years. And when he passed away, we had melted down. They weren't fabulously rich, but they had a few $1 million of liquid cash plus 3 houses. So we were able to melt down the estate by getting it into the children and the grandchildren's hands over those 10, 12 years. But what's really important, and what I point out, is that they actually were able to help the kids. The kids never blew the money. Whatever mom and dad said the money was going towards, it went, and it stayed. Those kids the grandchildren have since grown up. They've all gone to college, paid for by Grandma and Grandpa, which Grandma and Grandpa knew that was the fact, and the grandkids know that it was Grandma and Grandpa that paid for their education. So what I want to tell you is that John and Margaret actually got to see their legacy play out in front of them. They actually had their hands on that legacy. They were able to not just help their kids, but educate, and they educated them by bringing me in to work with the kids and ultimately the grandchildren as well. The second story I use as an advisor that I coached Alan, it was actually his family. Working with Alan one day, and we were talking about an estate planning. He said, you know what, Dan, my in-laws actually have a great thing they do for their grandchildren. Whenever a 13-year-old turns 13, they go to them and they say, we want to take you on a week-long trip. Now, these are smart grandparents. They know no 13-year-old really wants to go off with Grandma and Grandpa for a week. So they say, we want to take you on a week-long trip. And we want you to bring your best friend. And when I'm telling that, you notice I slow it down. And we want you to bring your best friend. And then I go on to tell the audience, think about that. For the $5,000-$10,000 that the trip cost Grandma and Grandpa, what if instead of doing that trip, that money had gone to the grandchild as beneficiary of the will? How much impact would it have on that grandchild? How long would the grandchild remember that, think about it fondly, in comparison to the memories that they'll have of that trip with their grandparents and their best friend? From the age of 13, for the rest of their life, they're going to have spikes of happiness when that memory flashes, and that's going to happen throughout their lives. So what a great way that these grandparents are getting to see their legacy play out. Finally, the third story is my own dad. When my dad turned 80, we went to a Hungarian restaurant, myself, my 3 siblings, everybody's spouses, and all the grandchildren. We had a beautiful meal. At the end of the meal, my dad, the birthday cake in front of him, stands up and says, "All right, whose birthday is this anyways?" And, "Yeah, Dad, it's your birthday." He goes, "Okay, my birthday, I think I get to do what I want on my birthday, right?" "Yeah, Dad, you get to do." And this is how I'm telling the audience, you do. And then my dad picks up a stack of envelopes, and you can see there's writing on. He walks around the table and he hands one purposefully to each and every individual with their name on it. And then he says, "Go ahead, open them. This is my birthday present to me. I'm gifting this to you." Everybody opens, and there's a check for everyone. Not phenomenal checks. In fact, for the grandchildren, it was $1,000. But both my teenage sons, one in college at the time, look at this, and you can just see their eyes popping. My son Ben's looking at this check, and my dad turns towards Ben, and Ben's looking at him. And my dad says, "Ben," and he's pointing at him, and he says, "You need to promise me," and Ben's like, "Yeah, Grandpa, you need to promise me that you're not going to take this money and do anything like buy school books with this. This is to have fun with." And you could just see by Ben's face, his eyes just got bigger. This big grin on his face just got bigger. And you could see the joy it brought my dad in doing the exact same thing. Again, getting to see his legacy play out in front of him. And that's the type of story you're going to get the audience just emotionally involved when you're able. Use my stories, use your own stories. Hopefully you've got some borrow stories. Just don't make them up. Real stories are better because they're authentic. Talk about charities. Do you want to gift now? Do you want to wait till you're gone? Do you want to do it with cash? Do you want to do it with shared? Do you have insurance policies that you can change the benefit? Whatever technical strategy you want to throw in here, fine, do it. Talk to that. Now, on the tax side, obviously with every state having different tax rules, you're going to bring up, whether or not there are estate taxes, gift taxes, inheritance taxes. And this is where, rather than having a big case study, speak to it directly. If in fact you've got a story that you can talk to it. There is a Stanford study that showed, and it's a storytelling study, you can look it up, that when students were given case studies to read through, the next day the researchers went back and they tested the students, and the students remembered under 10% of the facts and figures that were within those case studies. They remembered about 63% of the stories that were in the case studies. It just goes to show you the impact stories have. And again, I've got to tell you, I've watched a lot of advisors do overly technical presentations, advisors or estate attorneys, and the eyes of the attendees just glaze over because it's too technical, and you're not talking about them necessarily, and that's what we want to do. We want as many points to hit everybody as much as humanly possible. Again, you're going to see some strategies and stories that can come with these over these next couple, and this is where you're showing that you know and have the technical expertise that they need but you're not going to talk to all this. It would take, well, days obviously to talk about all, but pick one or two, talk quickly, give stories to them. And finally, you come to this and you say, so, as I mentioned before, everybody's thinking about their state in gross terms, other than CPAs and planners, advisors such as myself. You don't even have to read this off. You just have to show, there's a big difference in what you think your estate is compared to what an estate after the fact will actually look like. And you've got to know that. And then you can work with that. And in some instances, you can actually grow that after tax, after death estate when strategies are used to do exactly that. So my final question to all of you is, do you have the right people in place within the wills to act as your executors, your co-executors, your alternate executors, the trustees of the inter vivos or the testamentary trusts that you've put in place, if you need guardian place? Do these people know what they should do? Let me ask you, and then I go to the audience, and again, participation. I'm going to say, who here has actually ever acted as an executor in helping to wrap up an estate for a family member or a friend? And put your hand up, because when you put your hand up, whoever has acted, they'll put their hand up. And then I look in the eye of whoever I'm going to pick with their hand up, and I'm going to look at them directly, and I'm going to say, how did that go? And invariably, they're going to say, wow, not so well. Or they're going to say, I had no idea what I was doing. Or they're going to say, I had no idea how long and how much work it took. And then you'll start to hear other people chime out their experience as well. Just now you've got audiences telling other members what this really entails and how much they really need to know. And you're up at the front, you're the one that knows this, so you're the one that's going to be the benefit of this. But you look at one person and they'll start the ball rolling. And then I'm going to say, well, and finally, the big question is, right? What does your legacy look like at the end of the day? The research shows, and many of you have probably read The Millionaire Next Door or other research that shows, again, when people, and this is the do no harm part of my philosophy, second part on estate planning, and I tell them, the research shows that people that receive too much money through inheritances, through lottery wins, through gambling wins, quite often they end up in a worse financial situation. The reason is they buy things that their actual cash flow can't sustain, and they end up with financial problems, and many of them end up far worse off than had they never received the money at all. So what are you leaving as an estate, as a legacy? Here I don't read. My statement to them is, it's interesting. Most people think that estate attorneys make their money from drafting wills, powers of attorneys, and trusts. There's nothing further from the truth. Those are lost leaders. What they charge doesn't really pay for their time. Where do you think estate attorneys make their money? And be silent for a moment. People might say, if not, give it 2 to 3 seconds. They make it in court. They make it when sister is suing brother, mother is suing son, granddaughter is suing grandma or grandpa. That's where the money, the litigation in estates, and it always comes about because, number one, there wasn't a proper estate plan drafted. Number two, people that should have known, whether it's kids, grandkids, siblings, spouses, whoever, they didn't know. There were no proper discussions. It doesn't mean you need to have everybody in on the estate discussion, but very often you need to have others involved. That's where things go wrong. So you probably ask, what's my role in all of this? Well, there's a finance professor by the name of Moshe Malevsky. He wrote a book a number of years ago called Are You a Stock or a Bond? And in that book, and he's the most written academic, remember, in the world on personal finances, he said consumers should treat themselves like corporations when it comes to their personal finances. corporations are very effective, they're very efficient, and if we ran our own personal finances to optimize everything, we would do so much better. So with that in mind, what I do with my clients is I put you in the position of you Inc., you Incorporated. You are the CEO or co-CEOs of you Inc., you Incorporated. My job is to act as your personal chief financial officer. And I've got two roles. Number one is I help you qualify and quantify the goals. So the who, what, where, when, why of all your goals. And when we talk about estate planning, it's all those 5 W's. Then quantify. We put time and money. And with time and money, as long as I know those two elements, I can figure out anything mathematically. The beauty of calculators, but more so software. That's number one position that I take. Number two is having connections with all the experts that I need so that if there's anything to do with your finances, to do with your estate, I can always get the question answered. If I don't have the answer, I can get it. Very often I can get it at no cost to you, or at least at a very reduced cost. If you don't have a will, or you do have a will, but it's outdated and you need it rewritten, if you don't have an attorney in place, I can refer you to attorneys. All of these experts I have at my beck and call, and they're there for you. My job is to act as the conduit to those experts. So you will never have a question that goes unanswered. So you see where you've just been positioned. You are now at the head of the estate planning process for these attendees, ultimately your clients. And this is going to really nail it down because we talk about the estate planning process. Right off the bat, we've got to establish what your retirement lifestyle and expenses looks like, because once we figure that out, I can do the numbers and say, you've got enough money that you will never be able to spend it. So you have choices now. If you want to start bringing your children or grandchildren charities into it and see your legacy play out, we can do that. We can do the right numbers. We can make sure it never impacts your retirement. If you don't, then we'll know that as well. So again, this is not something an estate attorney is ever going to do. You need me to figure that out. And then I just walk through this and we look at these, and I'm not going to talk to it, but you'll notice, then I'm going to pipe up, formalize. So we're going to make sure we get you to the estate attorney, your wills, your powers of attorney, any trusts that are needed. We're going to get those legally and properly drafted in place. In other words, you, the financial advisor, the financial planner, now the estate planning professional, you're running through all this before you get them to the estate attorneys to get all the documentation properly drafted. And then you're going to follow up. And for those of you that work with estate attorneys or any type of attorneys and lawyers, they don't follow up with clients like advisors. We're talking to our clients multiple times a year. If you've ever had a will drafted, you may never hear from that lawyer or attorney again. Therefore, your estate is just sitting in limbo until you either come up with it or somebody suggests you do, something triggers it. But when you're working with me, we're going to be reviewing this on an ongoing basis. Here I'm coming back to Happy Money. And the reason I'm coming back is I want to show them I'm not just talking finances. I'm talking almost philosophically about their happiness and then their legacy. Remember what the research says. Buy experiences rather than things, right? Shake it up, novelty. Get novelty into your life. Buy your free time. Help your kids, help your grandkids with delayed gratification. Don't let them get into the bind that so many of the millennials are stuck in, or the Gen X's are stuck in today, where they're just burdened by debt. Help them out with that and help others. We're happier when we help others. And really, isn't that what legacy planning is all about? So now we're going to take questions in a couple minutes. I've left some time aside. So if you've got questions, and you can use this if in fact you do have a feedback form in your package for the attendees. If you don't, just remove the slide, but you're going to tell them how to give you feedback. Or, remember I promised you that I'd set aside 10 times, whatever, 30 minutes, 60-minute sessions for anybody that has big questions. You can talk about the yellow stickies or talk to your assistant at the back, or you've got it here. But you want to make sure before you get to the questions that you remind them that they can book a time with you. I then throw this slide up. I don't read it. I just leave it there for about 5-10 seconds. You'll hear some chuckling. I throw this one up, and again, book your appointment now. And finally here, we're at a close, and I'm going to take questions. And this is also where I'm going to go into my power close. Again, it's all in the documents. It's all in the booklet we'll send out. It's all in the notes of the PowerPoint as well. But basically, I'm saying, the time is now. The only thing worse than not coming to this presentation is walking away and doing nothing about it. If you think you're just going to think about it, that is the enemy of getting things done. Everybody's going to think about it. And what do they really do? They don't think about it. They don't get things done. But your legacy is worth so much more than not getting it done. So I'm going to wrap up with my power close. Then I'm going to take some questions. Have 2 questions in the back of your mind just in case nobody asks the question. So it's, oh, okay, that's funny, because I always get this one, either how you get paid or whatever it is. But remember, your goal here is to get appointments booked. And you're either getting them booked now, or you're going to have a follow-up methodology. White Glove has it. We have methodologies. Follow up with those that attended, those that didn't attend, because you've got White Glove is going to provide you with all that contact information. So I hope this has been of value to you. I hope you've got a lot of ideas. Really hope you take advantage of White Glove and Advice to Advisors and start marketing and prospecting through estate planning. As I said, it did wonders for my business. It's done wonders for hundreds of advisors that we've worked with. And in my belief, there is no better topic to work with to grow your business than estate planning. And it's just absolutely valuable to your prospects and your clients. So by all means, feel free to connect with us at Advice to Advisors. Connect with me on LinkedIn. But if you're interested, if you haven't bought the PowerPoint already, this PowerPoint, just go to advicetoadvisors.com, go to shop. You can buy the PowerPoint. You can also buy a coaching session. With that coaching session, it's going to be you and me talking one-on-one about your presentation for an hour. And then you're going to record your presentation and we'll critique it. And as much as advisors hate to role play, I can't tell you how beneficial it is for you to actually do that recording and for us to critique it. We've had a lot of advisors go through that, and it always helps them before the presentation. So please take advantage of that. So no better way to prospect, to market yourself, become the expert. You're already doing a lot of the work of an estate planner. It's such a valuable service you have to offer. Why not be known for doing so? So until the next time, hope to see some of you, talk to some of you. Take care. See you soon. Bye-bye for now.